When did your something's not right here gut feeling ever save you? Story 1. I used to just drive around country roads when I would feel stressed out or sad as a way to get away and listen to music. One evening, I was driving with my best friend in the car, and we were on a gravel road that had a huge hill. We were driving toward the sunset, but it was winter and the light was fading fast. As the car started down the hill, I had a moment where I thought to myself, my brights should be on, and I flicked them on. At the bottom of this super steep hill stood 6 deer in the road. I slammed on the brakes, and the car turned sideways and skidded to a stop about 4 feet from the deer. Those deer didn't even move. They just stared into the passenger side of my car, and my best friend pointed at them and said, "Hey, deer!" The car was fine, we were fine, and the deer were all okay. I don't drive around like that anymore. Story 2. My sister, since she was about 5, was always obsessed with tsunamis and would always ask my dad every night before she went to sleep if there would be a tsunami that night. We lived on a beach. About 5 years later, when our family was on holiday in Samoa, an earthquake struck at about 6 a.m. It was only a dull, low rumble, but went on for over a minute. Everyone at the resort woke up, went outside for a few minutes, then went back to bed. My sister, having been obsessed with tsunamis, ran down to look at the water, noticed the sea pulling back, and ended up saving a lot of lives, including my own. There was about a minute from her noticing until the tsunami hit. Luckily for us, there was a cliff right behind the resort. If not, a lot more people would have been killed. It was something like a gut feeling 5 years in the making. Story 3. Not me, but my science teacher. When she was a teenager, she was standing near some lights at a pedestrian crossing with her friend. Everything was very chill, but out of nowhere, she had this gut feeling that both of them had to move. They moved just a couple of meters away, and the next moment, a car hit another car and then crashed into one of the street's electricity utility poles, which fell and exploded. A minor explosion, but enough to be dangerous. It happened exactly where they had been standing. One of the wires also snapped and hit the ground right where they were standing as well. They were basically in a scene of car wreckage, snapped wires, electrical explosions, and a collapsed pole. Just really insane. If the pole had missed them, the wire would have hit them, and if not that, then most likely the cars would have. That gut feeling to move away saved both of them. I remember this story so clearly from high school science class because it was such a what just happened moment. Pity. I only paid attention to these stories and not actual science. Story 4. I went to the hospital with shortness of breath and my heart racing. They did a chest x-ray, blood tests for clots, an ECG, and a few other tests, but everything came back normal. After observing me overnight, everything still looked good. My oxygen saturation was perfect. My heart rate was still a bit elevated, but nothing too crazy. And it seemed that it was likely leftover symptoms from a bad virus I'd had a week or so earlier. The ER doctor asked me how I would feel if they sent me home, and I just had a bad feeling about it all. I told him that I didn't have any real reason, just that I felt off. He said, "Fair enough, let's try one more test, and if that came back negative, then they'd send me up to general medicine to investigate further." That test was a VQ scan, which found that despite all the other tests showing no results for blood clots, I actually had several of them in both lungs. I ended up with a diagnosis of unprovoked bilateral pulmonary embolisms and have been on blood thinners for life. I'm extremely grateful both for that bad feeling and for the ER doctor who was willing to listen. Story 5. When I was about 10 years old, I was going to the beach with my older sister, her friends, and their parents. They had a van that was open in the back. Think white van, no seats. The other friends of my sister's friends took turns sitting on the father's lap when he asked if they wanted to steer the van. He then asked me, and my gut said, "No, this man is creepy." The look in his eyes sent shivers down my spine. Once we got to the beach, I forgot all about the man and focused on having fun. Fast forward several months later, my sister's friends asked if my sister wanted to sleep over. She refused, and my mom and I were confused about why she didn't want to go. We kept encouraging her to. Eventually, she broke down in tears and told us that one night their father had harmed her. The van incident and my feelings all came rushing back. I wish I hadn't ignored that gut feeling and had shared it with my mom and sister before anything happened. Sometimes I still feel guilty about it. That was over 30 years ago. I don't remember what happened to the man. I just remember a state vehicle being at our house a lot afterward. No one ever talked about it again, and I never asked. Story 6. When I was in college, I lived in a rough part of Chicago, Humboldt Park, Logan Square before gentrification. I liked to take late-night walks, even when living in that neighborhood as a 20-year-old woman. Yeah, I know, pretty unwise. One night, I was feeling stressed, so I went out for one of my walks. I was walking along a somewhat busy road. Cars were zooming past me. Everything seemed normal. I wasn't paying much attention because I was too wrapped up in whatever was bothering me that night. Suddenly, a chill shot up my spine. Hypervigilance washed over me, and I became more alert than I had ever been. Something was wrong. Someone was watching me. I quickly spotted a car. It was driving in the opposite direction, a little slower than usual. It was too dark to see inside, and the car looked pretty normal. But I still knew something was off. They were watching me. I just knew it. The car drove past and then made a U-turn. Now it was behind me, creeping along the curb. Luckily, there was a Walgreens a few blocks ahead. I started walking faster, and the car eventually sped past and disappeared into a corner. But I still didn't feel safe, so I sprinted the rest of the way to Walgreens. I told the security guard what happened, and we both went outside. The car was parked up the street, about 50 to 100 feet away. The security guard was a big guy and looked intimidating. He marched toward the car, and it immediately backed up, made a U-turn, and drove off fast. He called the police, and they drove me home. I never went on another late-night walk again. My gut made me alert, but it was really the security guard who saved my life. I'm sure that if he hadn't been there that night, something bad would have happened to me. I wish I could find him to thank him. Story 7. Last year, December 1st, I had been sleeping almost nonstop for a week, trying to fight what I thought was the flu. I woke up and had this intense gut feeling telling me something wasn't right with me. I called my parents to let them know, and then took a cab to the emergency room. They did blood work, the whole 9 yards. I was there for 8 hours. I was discharged and sent home. The next morning, they called and asked me to come back because they found something in my blood, bacteremia and endocarditis. I was immediately put on penicillin. For 2 months, more tests, more things wrong. I went in for a specialized test on December 21st, and when I woke up, they told me I needed surgery as soon as possible. They were trying to find a surgical team. The earliest available was the 24th. I went in, and during the operation, I had an ascending aortic aneurysm, which led to an aortic dissection. They were able to fix it. I have a synthetic valve now. Here's the kicker. I work in a restaurant kitchen right before the start of the holiday season. Normally, most cooks would tough it out and just work. Most think, it happens, it'll get better soon, just keep going. But there was something about the way I was feeling this time that made me go to the hospital. I was told that if I hadn't gone, I likely would have died before my birthday, and the aneurysm would have only been discovered during the autopsy. That still sends chills down my spine. My best friend, who works as an emergency room nurse at the same hospital, was silently freaking out but held it together for me. She explained just how serious it all was once I was in recovery. I've promised her I'll always speak up if I get that same feeling again. Story 8. One time I was at the bank using the ATM. I noticed a black and yellow van parked with a man sitting in the driver's seat. The van was off, and he was just sitting there. It made me uncomfortable, so I didn't want to go home right away. Instead, I got in my car and moved to the other side of the parking lot near a hardware store and outdoor recycling center. This was broad daylight. I sat in my car pretending to read, and then the van started up and moved down to my side of the lot. Again, he reversed the van into a parking spot that faced my car. At that point, I knew I shouldn't go home, which was nearby. So instead, I got out and went to talk to the 2 men working at the recycling center. I asked if I could sit on their extra chair because the van guy was making me uncomfortable. They said sure, and since business was slow, we started chatting. I asked them how they liked the work and how business had been. The van guy eventually started up his van and left, after I took a picture and texted the info to my husband. After another 10 minutes with the guys, I took a circuitous route home to make sure the van wasn't still around. Here's the kicker. I asked the guys how long they'd been working at the recycling station, and they said about 4 months. I said, "Oh, what did you do before this?" And they both said, "Oh, we were in prison." Well, whatever. They still helped me feel safe. Story 9. Almost 10 years ago, I was working security at a site about 50 miles from home. I got off shift at midnight and didn't bother to change out of uniform since I was only planning to stop for gas. 2 gas stations in that town were open after midnight, but I absent-mindedly passed the first one. I pulled into the second station. Same brand, same gas price, same sketchy vibe. But something didn't feel right. I didn't see anyone around except the clerk. But I decided to go back to the first station. I filled up and started heading back out of town. As I approached the second station again, I saw 3 city police cars, 2 sheriff's deputies, and a state trooper blocking the road, guns drawn. Turns out a city cop had walked in on a robbery. The suspect shot the officer in the vest, and the store owner knocked the guy out cold with a bat before the officer could recover and draw his weapon. That could have been me, standing there in a uniform with a shiny badge but no body armor. Story 10. This one's about my mother. She saved my grandfather's life when he had a stroke while sitting in his chair in the living room. We had all started walking around the neighborhood when my mom, about 50 to 75 meters from the house, suddenly said, "I'm going to go back and check on Dad." I went with her, and I nearly witnessed my grandfather die. He was in his chair, conscious but unable to move or speak, just staring at my mom with wide, terrified eyes. She called 911 once, then again when she felt they were taking too long. When the ambulance arrived, they got him on the stretcher, but it was too wide for the door. We ended up tearing the door frame off to get him out. Because he was conscious, he actually remembered the ride to the hospital. He told us later that he heard someone say, "There's no chance this guy's going to make it." I was around 5 or 6 years old at the time. He's still alive to this day, more than a decade later. At my mom's funeral, part of his speech was about how, without her actions that day, he wouldn't have had those final years to spend with her, and for that, he's eternally grateful. Story 11. I usually go to the club with my husband. He was out of town, but some friends said they'd be there. My club has always felt safe, but the area around it can be hit or miss. Clubs, alcohol, and late nights attract all sorts. Since I was alone, I chose my parking spot carefully. The usual one was a few blocks off, and that felt too far. The paid lot was open, but they crammed cars in so tightly it made me uncomfortable. I ended up choosing a street spot 2 blocks away. The block itself was dark, but the next one up was brightly lit thanks to a large hotel. Basically, I had one semi-dark block, a well-lit block with the parking lot and attendant, and then the club. From the corner, I could see both my car and the club if I leaned far enough. The moment I stepped into the club, something felt off. None of my friends showed up, which wasn't normally a big deal, but the vibe was wrong. A guy kept trying to buy me a drink. I kept turning him down. Not just because I don't accept drinks from strangers, but also because he didn't seem to be flirting. I couldn't figure out why he was so insistent. I lied and said I was on medication. He kept pushing, so I finally agreed to a sealed bottle of water. Instead, he came back with a typical drink glass. The second he handed it to me, he vanished. I poured it down the bathroom sink. My internal alarms were going off, so I looked for someone to walk me out, but no one I knew was around. Eventually, I gave up and decided to leave alone. 2 blocks in straight line, mostly lit. What could go wrong? The moment I crossed the street, a voice in my head screamed, "You messed up! Get your keys out and be ready!" I started debating whether to turn back, but the voice said, "Too late, don't run or they'll know you know. Just act normal." I looked for the parking attendant. Gone, no one around. I reached the dark block where my car was parked and almost froze, but that voice urged, "Go, now!" I started walking faster, trying not to drop my shaking keys. Just as I unlocked my car door, another car pulled up behind me, sliding sloppily into the space. Half in the street, facing the wrong direction, I locked the doors, started the engine, and backed up. In my mirror, I saw a guy jump out, rushing toward my passenger side. His fist was clenched, and his arm was tensed. I was already pulling out, praying I'd given myself enough room. Had he parked any closer, I wouldn't have made it. I was prepared to hit the car in front of me if needed. That voice in my head was screaming, "Don't stop! Go!" And then I was gone. Silence. I sped down the highway trying to make sense of what had just happened. Later, I realized it might have been a setup. Drink guy spikes the drink. Car guy is the pickup. I truly believe it could have been a trafficking operation. If I'd been even 2 seconds slower, I can't imagine how that night would have ended. Story 12. I was 15 years old and my mom dropped me off at McDonald's to get breakfast while she went across the street to get Starbucks. It was a shopping mall in suburbia, and we were on our way to pick up a new kitten a few hours away. Instead of walking the 100 yards to my mom, I sat outside waiting for her to pick me up. Teenagers, I guess. As I'm standing there, a guy in an old station wagon with 2 kids in the back starts talking to me. He asks where I'm going, and I say whatever town it was. He says he's going there too with his kids and asks if I want to come. I tell him no, that my mom is across the street, and he comes closer. My gut is saying something is off, so I see a random woman walk out of Starbucks, and I point to her and say, "That's my mom right there." He freaked out and left really quickly. I still remember those 2 kids in the back seat. They looked so off. I wonder to this day if they're okay. Story 13. A few years ago, when I was 19 and studying abroad in Europe, my friend and I decided to go to Turkey. It was our first time really traveling on our own without a group, and we decided to walk around the square outside the Blue Mosque. We felt very safe during the day and decided to see the city at night with the lights. As we were in the square, we were approached by the usual store owners trying to sell us things. Eventually, most of them went away. And as we were going back to our hotel, a younger guy approached us. He said he had a shop on the corner, which he pointed to, filled with souvenirs, including carpets. I grew up with a lot of handmade woven carpets from my parents' travels to the Middle East and Asia. I decided it would be a nice gift. So we followed him, and when we got to what we thought was his shop, we stopped. We started to walk in, and he said, "Not that one, the one around the corner." We poked our heads around and sure enough, saw a store that only sold carpets. I started to get a slightly strange feeling, but nothing overwhelming, so we followed him since we could see the store. When we walked in, about 13 to 15 other men were inside. They started pointing out carpets and showing us around, and I began to feel really uncomfortable. My friend seemed completely at ease, so we followed the group around a bend into another part of the store. In Turkey, it's common to be offered tea, so that part wasn't odd, but the men, who were now surrounding us, were insistent that we have tea with them in the basement. I kept saying no, but they were leading us toward the steps, completely surrounding us. We got to the steps, and my friend started walking down. My body started to sweat, my heart raced, and I had never felt such an overwhelming fear. I kept trying to think of how we could overpower these men. I grabbed my phone, stopped in my tracks, and gasped. "Friend's name? We need to go right now. My mom just texted me asking why." "We aren't back at the hotel yet because the map shows we're at the store. We're supposed to FaceTime with them in 10 minutes. The men looked around and said we could have tea in less time than that. I kept insisting that my parents were freaking out because they saw we were in the carpet store and not at the hotel, and that they would probably contact the embassy if we didn't get going. They continued blocking the staircase. I told them we'd come back for tea in the morning, that I still really wanted a carpet, and that we needed to leave for now. It took a little persuading, but they eventually opened a path to the door. One of them followed us back to the square, insisting we return and see them again. Of course we didn't. I have no idea if they were completely harmless or not, but I've never had such an overwhelming feeling before. They could have easily drugged us, wrapped us in carpets, and taken us somewhere. My parents didn't actually have our location because my phone was on airplane mode, so who knows? On the other hand, I might have been paranoid, but it's not a situation I ever want to be in again. Once we were back at the hotel, my friend told me she was scared too, but thought I was fine, so she went along with it. Story 14. I was driving, and it started to snow. I noticed that I was going a bit too fast and strongly sensed I should slow down. I did, and a couple of seconds later, I came around a bend and saw that the road was suddenly covered in ice. I started to fishtail, sliding directly toward 2 people standing outside their car. They had wrecked in the same way I was about to, and were standing outside with me heading straight toward them. I quickly thought about my options and ended up doing a hard right straight into the highway barrier. I slid nearly 100 plus feet, dragging the front of my car to slow it down. Because I had decided to slow down, I was able to give the two guys enough time to get out of the way before I slammed into their cars. Even though I totaled my car, which was upsetting, I didn't end up harming anyone that night. The police didn't ticket anyone, thankfully, and they finally sanded the road. After we had all wrecked, snow while driving still scares me to this day. Story 15. I had gone to a bar back home with a few friends, and afterward, everyone was supposed to go to a house party. I had been excited to go from the moment I was invited, halfway through the night. I had this gut feeling not to go. I told my best friend that she shouldn't go, but she insisted because there were a few cute guys there. I couldn't shake the feeling that we shouldn't go, but she talked me into it. When we got into my car to head to the party, the feeling got worse. I grew up around cars and drive a manual. My best friend is completely clueless when it comes to cars. So I deliberately grinded the gears, jerked the car, and made it stall. Acting like something was wrong, I pretended to try to fix what wasn't broken. And after about 15 to 20 minutes of fixing my car, cops and fire trucks, followed by EMS, flew past us. I fixed my car, but told my best friend that I just wasn't feeling well. She agreed and said my car breaking down ruined her mood, so we went back to my place to watch movies. About an hour after getting home, we got a call from a friend telling us that the girl who owned the house and was throwing the party had been cheating on her husband, who was deployed. He came back on leave to surprise her and caught her in bed with his friend. The guy pulled a weapon and started shooting at her and his friend while everyone else fled the house. Story 16. When I was young, around 8 or 9 probably, I lived 3 blocks from a convenience store. It was the early 90s. My best friend and I convinced our parents to let us walk to the store alone to get some snacks. Important to add that the 2 blocks closest to the store were connected, but the 3rd block we lived on was its own unconnected neighborhood. So anyway, as we were walking back from the store, we were coming up to the 1st street, and a truck drove by and stopped on the side of the road between the 1st and 2nd block. On our side of the road, I stopped and told my friend that we should go down the 1st street and go through the neighborhood, come back out the 2nd street, and then head to our 3rd street to avoid the truck. She thought I was being silly, but I refused to keep walking on the main street, so she followed me down the 1st road. We were now in the 1st neighborhood and about halfway between the 1st and 2nd street when we saw the truck slowly driving down the 2nd street into the neighborhood. The driver saw us and immediately slammed on the gas and turned his truck toward us on the street. We ran and hid in some bushes further into the neighborhood for about 10 minutes. We heard the truck driving by back and forth for about the first 5 minutes, and then it was quiet, so we started making our way out of the neighborhood toward the 2nd street again. Suddenly, here comes the truck again. Slowly, he saw us and accelerated toward us again. We jumped over a fence into a backyard and started pounding on the back door. By the way, this was a Tuesday, middle of the day during summer vacation. Most people were at work, but miraculously, a man and woman opened the door and let us in. The woman had just had a baby like a week before, so they were home on leave. They called the cops and my mom, and the man went outside. He said the truck drove by, and the driver saw him standing there and sped out of the neighborhood. Cops and my mom showed up minutes later. We gave a description and never heard anything about it again. Our parents just drove us to the convenience store from then on. My mom still talks about it to this day, and how shocked she was that I had such a strong intuition at that age. Story 17. A big group of friends and I were walking home from an event in a town we weren't familiar with. It was night and hardly anyone was around. Empty streets and all that. We were walking down a sidewalk that had high fences next to it. So when you turned a corner, whatever was around it was out of sight. One of the girls fell behind, distracted by her phone, I think. And I noticed, so I started drifting behind as well to become a sort of midway point between her and the group. Soon we were nearing where we were staying, and our group rounded a corner, then started making their way into the yard where our living quarters were. I saw a car drive past us, then turn the corner down the street the girl was still on. As soon as I saw it, I suddenly got this suspicious, awful feeling. So I stopped and went back to the corner to keep an eye on her. The car drove past her, stopped, did a complete U-turn, and slowly started creeping up behind and alongside her. She was still on her phone and didn't notice a thing. I stepped out from behind the corner and started walking toward her. The car sped off quickly as soon as the driver saw me. It scares me that someone could have grabbed her, and none of us would have seen a thing. It would have just been one of those cliché movie moments where you turn around and realize a member of the group is missing. To make it even more chilling, she had just gotten engaged a few weeks prior. I think the fact that we had worked with some safe houses in the area that discussed human trafficking probably made me more alert, and the area we were in was known for that kind of thing. Story 18. I was hanging out with friends at a bar and was planning to head to my friend's place to stay the night. We drove separately, though. It was in a city with a super high crime rate, and in an even rougher part of town. We left the bar around 3 a.m., and the drive wasn't far. But I was really low on gas and wasn't sure if I was going to make it. I'm not normally a person who's paranoid about city or neighborhood crime rates, and I spent half my time in this city and in the area we were in anyway, so it wasn't unfamiliar to me. Even so, just to be on the safe side, I picked a gas station that was well lit and at a relatively busy intersection. I was the only car there. And when I pulled up to the pump, I luckily took a moment to text my friend that I'd catch up with him in a few minutes. As I was doing that, another car pulled up right on the other side of the pump I was at. I have no idea what made me pause, but I waited a second to let them get out first, but I had to keep waiting because they weren't getting out. At first I thought maybe they were grabbing their wallet or texting someone. Just taking a minute. I couldn't see through the window tint at all, but I also didn't want to make it obvious that I was watching them. I'm also not a very intimidating guy. I waited for 5 minutes and then started getting more worried. I texted my friend to tell him exactly where I was. I couldn't leave because I didn't have enough gas to get anywhere else, and I didn't want to drive to my friend's place in case they followed me. Another 10 minutes later, the car pulled off. No one ever got out to get gas. Just like me, I decided to risk it and drove to my friend's place with whatever gas I had left. I'm not sure what made me so paranoid in that moment, but I'm really glad I hesitated. Story 19. Not mine, but my aunt's. She was with my mom and some of their friends at Lake Sammamish the day Ted Bundy took Janice Ott and Denise Naslund. She was drinking heavily, and Ted approached her after apparently overhearing someone mention they needed to do a beer run. He told her that he and some friends had a keg, and she should come along. She threw her arm around his shoulder, and they started walking off. My mom and their friends called after her, and she initially didn't listen. She was a stunning blonde and a flirt. It was just beer. She thought she'd be fine. One of the other girls they were with walked up and said that one of the guys had gone to swim while they waited for her to come back. My aunt said the girl looked terrified, and suddenly my aunt felt like she was going to throw up. She dropped her arm and backed away. Ted more or less skittered off. Later, the girl told my aunt she had a bad feeling about the guy, and my aunt said she had felt nauseous too, but thought it was just because she was so drunk. Had she not been stopped, my aunt might have been Denise Naslund. Ted had already taken Janice at the time he approached her. She won't talk about that day, probably because she feels some form of survivor's guilt. Story 20. 2 friends and I were filming a music video and got back to our friend's house around midnight. As we were walking in through the back door, I saw what I thought was a mannequin lying next to the trash can. At first, I honestly believed it was a prank, because the alley was completely dark, and the mannequin was lying perfectly under the one light in the alley. I decided to check it out, and my 2 friends came with me. As we got closer, we realized it was a girl. We figured she was in her mid-20s and probably just passed out drunk, since there are a bunch of bars in the area. My one friend shook her, and after a few tries, she came to with this absolutely wild, animal-like look in her eyes. She jumped to her feet, thrashed at us a little, and then took off running down the dark alley. Understandably, she was scared because she had just woken up in an alley with 3 guys hovering over her. As she ran, we tried to follow while giving her space, because she was clearly panicking. I wanted to call the cops. One friend wanted to help her, but didn't want to get her in trouble. And the third friend thought we should just leave her alone, assuming she was drunk and heading home. While we argued and tried to keep our distance, we lost track of her. But we found her phone in the middle of the alley. It had hundreds of missed calls, and then it started ringing. We answered, and it was a very upset friend, understandably so, who said everyone had been trying to reach her. The friend said she was out of state but would call the girl's mom and have her call us. A minute later, the mom called and told us her daughter was 15 and had gone missing earlier that night. She was eerily calm and nonchalant about the whole thing and said something like, "Oh, she had her wisdom teeth out earlier today and is probably just messed up from the meds." She told us not to worry about calling the police. She'd handle it, and said she and her boyfriend would come by shortly to grab the phone. About 10 minutes later, the mom and her boyfriend showed up with flashlights, took the phone and all the info we had, made a few weird jokes, and walked off down the alley. The whole thing was strange, but they didn't seem worried, so we tried to move on with our night, though we felt uneasy. The next day, my buddy called me and said the mom had shown back up at his house, had a full breakdown in his living room, and told him they had found her daughter down the road a few minutes after meeting with us. She had apparently downed almost an entire bottle of vodka in every pill she could find in the house. They had to pump her stomach, and the doctors said if we hadn't found her, she would have been dead by morning. The mother then hugged my friend, gave him an envelope, and left. The envelope had $1,000 in it. Luckily, we had exchanged addresses earlier, so my buddy went and slipped the money back under her door. I don't know if she made it, because even though she was saved that time, being 15 and going through that much, I just don't know. I think about her a lot and truly hope she's okay. Story 21. November 20th, 15. I was staying in Paris for a few weeks with some friends who lived near the Bataclan in the Oberkampf area of the 11th arrondissement. I ended up getting into a fight with one of my friend's boyfriends, so I decided to stay with a second cousin I barely knew, but who had an extra room in her apartment near Pigalle. One night, my friends invited me to a bar near Oberkampf station because they missed me and wanted to hang out. I said yes and planned to nap before meeting them. I set my alarm for 8 a.m., but I accidentally set it for 8 p.m. My phone is always on Do Not Disturb, and I don't have vibration on because it stresses me out. I woke up confused and groggy when my cousin got home from work around 9:30 or 10 p.m. She knew of my plans and freaked out when she saw me stumbling out of my room, looking tired and disoriented. I checked my phone and saw dozens of texts from her and from my friends telling me not to come, to stay home, and saying that they were okay. Had I set my alarm correctly and taken my usual amount of time getting ready, I would have been exiting the Oberkampf station right when the shooting began at Bataclan. I sat with my cousin, watching the news all night long, crying and feeling helpless. Story 22. I was 16 when the PlayStation 2 was released, and my friends and I managed to get our hands on one by making a successful trip to a more rural Walmart nearby. Each of us got our console. However, the game selection there was pretty weak, even for a launch day, so we decided to pack up the consoles in my trunk and hit the Walmart closer to our homes on the way back. Same luck on the game selection there. We called it good enough and decided to head home. As we were walking up to my car, I saw another car parked about 3 spaces down from us, on the other side of the concrete divider. You know that sensation when you're driving next to someone on the highway, and they're perfectly centered in their lane, but you still know they're about to merge into you without looking? It was like that, but way more intense. I just saw these 2 guys leaning against the car. The one by the driver's door sized us up, then ducked down by his side panel and pulled up a revolver. I'm guessing he didn't know about the consoles in the trunk, but assumed we were late buyers with $300 in cash. I can still hear myself saying, "Just get in the car." Kind of forcefully, I jumped into the driver's seat, got the keys in the ignition immediately, and was already turning and pulling away before the other doors were fully shut. I didn't think. I just reacted. I don't even give myself credit for it, because it didn't feel like a conscious decision. All I know is that if he had caught me off guard and been any closer with that weapon, I don't think I'd have had the resolve to act fast enough. But thankfully, my brain saw the car about to merge into me, for me. Story 23. I knew the second I sat down on that bus that the guy across the aisle was going to follow me when I got off. Maybe it's because 2 weeks earlier, I'd realized the guy next to me on the bus was going to grab me when I scooted past him to get off. And he did exactly that. When I got that feeling, I trusted it. Without looking at the guy, I started trying to make a plan. I got so nervous about getting off at a brightly lit, busy intersection that ironically, I got off one stop too early at a dark and sparsely trafficked intersection. And you guessed it, he followed me off. On high alert, I hunched my shoulders and speed walked as fast as I could. The guy was keeping pace with me, not saying anything, just within my peripheral vision a few feet back. Suddenly, without warning, except for my gut instinct, the guy lunged at me and tried to drag me into an alley. Luckily, back in my 20s, I wore a lot of rings, and I wasn't entirely unprepared. I punched him as hard as I could in the face and ran screaming toward that brightly lit, busy intersection. Everyone stared at me, but no one bothered me, and I made it all the way home safely. Story 24. A little over a year ago, I matched with this guy on Tinder. He was good looking, and we chatted for a couple of weeks. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but something didn't feel right. So I just stopped texting one day. A couple of weeks went by, and he messaged me again to say hi. I ended up scrolling through our previous messages to try to remember why I'd stopped replying. I couldn't pinpoint a specific reason. He seemed fine. I figured maybe I was just having a bad day. So I asked him out. We went out a few nights later. I didn't really feel a connection with him in person. He seemed like a nice enough guy and was as attractive in person as in his photos. But he just rambled about random topics instead of trying to have a real conversation. Annoying and not my thing. But harmless. We got to the end of the date, and I agreed to get coffee at his place. No future relationship potential. But maybe he'd be good in bed, you know? We were making out on the couch a bit, and suddenly that feeling hit me again. He was on top of me, not even pressing down that hard. But it felt so oppressive and scary, I told him I needed to get home and left. He was clearly annoyed, but didn't try to stop me. I got in my car, and as soon as I pulled out of the parking lot, he started texting me. I replied as much as I could while driving, at stoplights and such, trying to be polite, saying it was me, not him, and that he was a great guy, etc. But he kept texting. I stopped responding because I couldn't safely text and drive in the dark and rain. Then he started calling. I answered once, and he gave me a lecture about how unprofessional I had been. He started out calm, then got angrier and angrier. I hung up. I wasn't going to deal with that. He kept texting and calling all night long. It was terrifying. He slowed down a bit in the morning, probably slept a little, then started again and continued for almost a week. I reported him to Tinder and seriously started researching how to get a restraining order. He finally stopped on his own. This is why I use a fake name on Tinder and why I always listen when my gut says something is off. Story 25. A couple of years ago, I was in the passenger seat while my boyfriend at the time was driving. It was about 1 a.m. Back then, I never wore my seatbelt in the passenger seat, even in bad weather. Stupid, I know. The weather was fine that night. Everything seemed normal. When suddenly I had an intense urge to put my seatbelt on, it actually felt like someone was whispering in my ear, "Put on your seatbelt now." I didn't do it at first because I didn't want him to notice and ask why. I wouldn't have had an explanation. Again, stupid, I know. But after a minute or two, I couldn't ignore the urge anymore. So I quietly put it on. About 20 seconds after I buckled up, a deer ran in front of the car. It was bad. We hit the deer going about 40 miles per hour, and the car was totaled. He told me later that he saw me put on my seatbelt and assumed I thought he was driving too fast. So he eased off the gas, from about 50 miles per hour down to 40 miles per hour. He chose not to say anything at the time. I think about that accident often and wonder how different things might have been if I hadn't put that seatbelt on. Story 26. My wife and I had an apartment in a really rough part of a city we used to live in. One day we were walking home and heard yelling and general chaos coming from a house about a block ahead. Nothing out of the ordinary for the area, but for some reason, something didn't feel right to me. I quietly put my hand down low and whispered to my wife, "Give me your phone. Give me your phone." This was back before everyone had a cell phone. Only my wife had one between us. As soon as she handed it over, I dialed 911. Within 2 seconds of me dialing, a guy burst out of a car parked out front and ran toward the house with 2 large butcher knives, screaming, "I'm going to hurt everyone." I got through to the operator just as he began pounding on the door. While I was talking with dispatch, the man turned and saw us. then started running toward us full speed. He was about 40 feet away when 4 police cruisers came flying up the street and stopped between us and him. They were able to arrest him without incident. I don't know what it was about that particular shouting match that set my instincts off, but something told me it wasn't going to end well if I didn't call the police immediately. Story 27. The first house I ever lived in had a ton of old trees in the back and side yards. At the time, in the early 90s, they were well over 40 years old. I was playing in the backyard, and one black walnut tree began moaning and creaking, so I decided to go tell my mom, because as a 7-year-old, I thought it was neat. Just as I got inside, I heard leaves rustling, wood cracking, and then a huge crash. The biggest limb on the tree had broken off and came crashing down right where I had been. If it didn't kill me, it would have seriously injured me. My mom has the scariest one. She lived in Oklahoma City with her first husband from 1976 until 1980, but their jobs often brought them back to Cincinnati, so they would take advantage of the time to see friends and family. Memorial Day weekend in 1977, she was home, and that Friday had gone to the Beverly Hills Supper Club with some old co-workers for dinner and a show. The next night, an actor or singer she liked was going to perform, and her husband asked if she wanted to go again with him and his brother. She agreed, but then, as she puts it, she just didn't feel like going again and didn't know why. So they canceled their plans, went out to dinner, and saw this new sci-fi movie called Star Wars. That evening, a massive fire broke out at the Beverly Hills Supper Club. Over 160 people died, and more than 200 were injured. Star Wars likely saved my mom's life. Story 28. I was leaving the house to go to work one day. Everything was normal. The kids were playing and watching that silly cartoon about a pig. The house was a mess, and my shoes were untied because of the 1-year-old. Nothing out of the ordinary. I went to kiss my girlfriend goodbye, and something stopped me. It was really strange, and I couldn't explain it. I did it anyway. It was a normal goodbye, nothing unusual. I headed out the door, got in my car, and tried to put it out of my mind. And about 10 minutes down the road, that nagging feeling wouldn't go away. I called in 2 hours of personal time at work and headed back home. I walked up to the door and opened it, and found a man I'd never seen before on the floor playing with my kids. My girlfriend came around the corner in obvious panic. He looked at her, then at me, then back to her, and bolted for the back door. I let him run because I wasn't about to catch a charge for hitting him. She had been cheating on me for 2 months, and he had been coming over almost every day, angry and trying to provoke me into violence. She kept trying to get a reaction from me. I said goodbye to the kids, grabbed some clothes and my laptop and left. Things went downhill from there. But as of the 18th, I now have full custody of my children and am in therapy trying to heal from the damage this all caused. Story 29. Didn't save me, but it saved quite a few of my friends. This was a few years ago. I used to keep my phone on me at all times. It was like my safety crutch. I was sitting and chatting with my mom and didn't have my phone on me for about 10 minutes. Something kept telling me something was wrong. I went to check it and saw I had missed multiple texts and calls from my best friend. I instantly knew something was wrong. I called her phone and ran out of the house. She was sitting in the park across from my house and had overdosed. I brought her back to mine and we got her to the hospital. Another time I was working and someone asked if I wanted to stay for drinks. I worked in a bar. Normally I would have, but something felt off. I went to my friend's flat instead. Luckily, I had a key and let myself in. I noticed a pillow on her floor and almost left it alone. But again, something told me to move it, and I found a bunch of empty pill packets underneath. She had also taken an overdose. I called an ambulance, and she ended up in the hospital. There are a few other examples, but these are the main ones. I seem to have a knack for knowing when people are trying to hurt themselves or are feeling really down. I keep my phone on me at all times now because of it. If I feel off, I check in with my friends. Always listen to your gut. You could be saving a life. Story 30. This past summer, I was going through some mental health issues. I was taking an antipsychotic, and when I went to get it refilled, doctors would always say, "That isn't something to take alone. It's normally used to help an antidepressant, so here's an antidepressant to help." Despite me saying I felt better without one, whatever, I took the antidepressant. Things went downhill fast. My mental health was declining faster than ever before. I'd walk to campus at midnight and randomly start crying. I'd drive myself to the mall for no reason and call my mom crying. I felt like I was losing control of my mind. At the same time, I was having suicidal thoughts and crazy spending habits. One day I was walking to class and just knew something was wrong. I could feel another crying spell coming on. So instead of going to class, I went to my university's mental health clinic. I saw a psych nurse and a doctor who both said, "It's bipolar disorder. We're sending you to the mental health unit at the hospital for further evaluation." Turns out that treating bipolar disorder with an SSRI is dangerous and can cause a mixed episode, feeling both high and low at the same time. They tapered me off the SSRI, and I'm now getting proper treatment. It was terrifying, feeling like I was going crazy and couldn't stop it. Story 31. I was walking at night because I live in what's supposedly a very safe neighborhood when I saw this guy walking toward me. Not a big deal. It's a large area with plenty of other people around. But then he started calling out to me and moving kind of erratically. I thought he might be hurt, so I took out my headphones and asked if he needed help. Usually I wouldn't feel threatened by something like this. The last time someone called out to me in this neighborhood, they just wanted to know if I'd seen their cat anywhere. But something felt very wrong, and I just kept thinking, "You need to leave now. Run as fast as you can." It was snowy out, so I didn't want to run. I just started backing up quickly as the guy came closer. I asked again if he needed help, and he was way closer than before. All of a sudden, he dropped whatever act he had been trying to pull and started running at me. I bolted as fast as I could. He must have realized he wouldn't be able to run over the ice like I was and gave up quickly, but he still kept walking at a slow pace. Honestly, I don't even know how I ran over the ice like that. I didn't own any snow boots, just rain boots with soles worn down to almost no traction. I was running for home when a voice in my head told me, "You need to go the long way around," I thought. Are you out of your mind? It's barely a minute to my house and the long way takes 10. But for some reason, I listened and ran the long way, which for the record is a terrible idea when you have bad lungs and just got hit with a wave of adrenaline. When I got home, I realized it was a good thing. The short way home was a single street, and the long way was a maze of many. If I had gone the short way, the guy likely could have figured out where I lived. I never saw him again. But I did see some random, I'm assuming drunk, guy hiding behind his car, just staring at me until I said, "I can see you, dude." And he did this exaggerated tiptoe walk back inside his house. Safe neighborhood? Sure, I hate this place. Story 32. When I was a freshman in college, I tried out some dating apps. One night, I met up with a guy, and we smoked a joint while walking from my dorm to his. From the moment I saw him in person, I regretted it. There was just something off about him. But I was afraid of being rude, so I went along with it. After I got high, it was really hard to think clearly. We went to the cafeteria for coffee, but he was insistent about going up to his room. I should have left then, but I wasn't in my right mind. As he led me down the hallway to his room, I had this ominous feeling. He never turned the lights on, just had red LED lights glowing. We sat on the sofa together to watch Black Mirror on his laptop. I hate horror, which made that choice even creepier. And he kept trying to move closer. I kept pushing him away. But nothing could have prepared me for the fear I felt when he got up, went to the door and locked it. At that moment, I didn't care about being polite. In my head, I was just like, nope, this is bad. He was scrawny, but I'm a small girl, and I didn't want to have to fight. So I faked a phone call from my roommate and told him I had accidentally locked her out of our dorm while she was in the shower, wearing only a towel. Then I grabbed my things and booked it out of there. Later, he texted me complaining that I didn't give him a goodnight kiss. I told him off. I'm just glad I found the courage to get out of there when I did. And I never put myself in that kind of situation again. Story 33. When my best friend and I were 19, we decided to drive to the beach for our birthdays. Her birthday is in early May, and mine is in late April. So we usually celebrated together and had the place to ourselves since it was off-season. My mom had warned us not to sit on the seawall or go near the water. When I asked why, she said she'd heard that a couple of her patients were robbed there. Of course, I thought, that would never happen to me. Well, my not-so-smart self and my friend decided to ignore my mom's warning and sit on the seawall. All of a sudden, I got this feeling. I looked at my friend and said, "We need to go now." She said I was overthinking what my mom told me, but with each passing second, the feeling got worse. I felt like I needed to run. I needed to get out of there. Then I looked to my left, and there was a man walking toward us. He was probably about 50 yards away, but the second I saw him, I knew. I told my friend to hurry up, and she started giving me grief for being paranoid and listening to my mom. But I could see the man walking faster now, and I noticed something shiny in his hand. My friend froze. I grabbed her by the hood of her sweater, threw her into the car, which was parallel parked right next to the seawall, and drove off with her half on my lap. As I sped away, I looked in the mirror and saw the man stop and just stare at us. Absolutely the worst feeling ever. Story 34. I was driving a rental car through rural Poland, headed to the Wolf's Lair in Gierwosz, up north near the Kaliningrad border. Just some tourist stuff. It had been recommended to me by a friend. I was driving down this very eerie two-lane road, and it was pretty late at night since I had left Gdańsk later than planned. You have to understand that this part of rural Poland at night is peaceful, but also straight out of a horror movie. Dense trees crowding the road and tiny villages spaced 30 to 40 minutes apart. I was driving and listening to whatever the radio could pick up when suddenly a man ran into the view of my headlights, about 100 yards ahead. He had blood all over his shirt and was trying to wave me down. I slowed down as I approached, trying to decide whether I should stop. Maybe he had been in an accident and needed help, but I felt a surge of adrenaline, and something felt extremely off. Where was his car or motorcycle if it was an accident? Why did he seem so agile if he was injured? As I got closer, I slowed down enough to make it seem like I might stop, but then I was hit with the overwhelming urge to floor it and get past him. I did, and as I sped by, I saw the silhouettes of at least two other people sprinting from the rear driver's side of the road, right out of my blind spot. These weren't casual joggers. They were sprinting aggressively toward my car. Now completely terrified, I drove on to my hotel, cursing the terrible GPS for taking me down such a remote route. When I checked in, I told the sleepy front desk guy what had happened. He said he'd heard of people being robbed at gunpoint using that exact tactic. One person pretends to be hurt, and when the driver stops, others rush in to take the car, passport, money, or worse. He told me I was lucky not to have stopped, and that it was definitely something best left to the authorities, especially at that hour. I felt guilty for not stopping, but all things considered, I think I absolutely made the right call by trusting my gut. Story 35. We live in a very deer-heavy area. I was driving to work one night when I saw two dead deer on the side of the road. It's a busy, populated place, but that's just what happens when you live in the Appalachian Mountains. Deer roam wherever they want. I suddenly had the urge to call my dad. While we were talking, I said, "Hey, just be careful on your way home, because I know you always take the parkway after you drop Mom off at work." It's totally driving Miss Daisy at my parents' house. It's adorable. Anyway, as I was pulling into the parking deck at work, my dad called me back. I thought it was a little strange since he knew I'd be at work. But when I answered, he told me that while he was driving on the parkway, he had rolled down his window to smoke a cigarette. He said he suddenly got a feeling that he should slow down and remembered what I had said about the deer. So he eased off the gas and rolled his window back up. Right after that, a deer literally fell down the embankment, horns first, and hit the side of his car, right at the door. It bounced off and ran off to the side of the road. If the window had been open, the antlers would have gone straight into his face. Thankfully, he wasn't hurt and the car only had minor damage. A game warden who was a few cars behind him stopped and helped him look for the deer, but they couldn't find it, so they assumed it ran off. He told me later that if he hadn't rolled up the window and slowed down, all because of my random warning, he probably would have been seriously hurt. Possibly worse. Story 36. I'm not sure if this counts the same way because my brain kind of figured out what was wrong and just took over. But here it goes. I'd been out drinking with a close friend, and we went back to his apartment to hang out and smoke for a while, as we often did. After a couple of hours, I was like, "All right, time for a taxi," called one. and headed outside. We said goodbye like always. Night, mate. Night. There's a line in a Terry Pratchett book about the kind of fear you feel when something normal changes in a way you can't explain. Outside, I looked back up at his apartment and noticed the curtains were drawn. He never closed his curtains. He's lazy. He usually just smokes, plays games, or watches movies until he crashes. The closed curtains were wrong. I'd looked at that apartment window 1,000 times and never even thought about curtains. But now they were shut. I apologized to the driver, went back upstairs and tried his door. It was unlocked, thank God. Told you he was lazy. I walked in and found him preparing to hang himself. We just stared at each other, and he shakily put everything down. I didn't know what to do, so I went inside and asked if he wanted to talk. We ended up talking for hours. He's still alive. There's not much of a happy ending beyond that. He has schizophrenia, struggles to keep a job, and drinks too much, but we're still fairly young in the grand scheme of things, and he's trying. I really hope he finds happiness one day, but I know I'll always worry. Story 37. This story isn't mine. It's my mom's one evening. She woke up at 2 a.m. She and my stepdad had fallen asleep on the couch. She woke him up, and instead of going to bed, she had this overwhelming desire to go for a walk. So they did, the entire walk. My mom said she felt like she was going somewhere with a purpose, not just strolling. Eventually, she and my stepdad came across an elderly woman lying face down in her driveway. They rushed to her. She was awake and crying. She had fallen on her way back into her house around 9 p.m. and couldn't get up. She had screamed and yelled, but no one came. She had basically accepted her fate. It was a cold, rainy night until my parents happened to walk by at 2 a.m. After making sure she was safe and had family on the way to check on her, they went home and fell back asleep. The kicker? A year later, my parents were at an estate sale at the same property. While chatting with a man there, the story came up naturally. He broke down in tears. He told my parents the woman was his mother, and she had passed away only a few weeks prior. He was the one she had called that night after they helped her inside. Apparently, she often referred to my parents as her guardian angels for the last year of her life. I'm not religious, but moments like this happen too often in my mom's life for me to call myself an atheist either. Story 38. There was one time when I had to take a different bus than usual to get home around 10 p.m. after work during the holiday season. There were a couple of guys, either late teens or early adults, on the bus, and they immediately set off my internal radar, even though they weren't doing anything wildly out of the ordinary. Just the kind of people you'd normally see riding the bus at that hour. Still, something felt very off. As we were riding, I heard them saying a lot of strange things, talking about meeting up with people, messing things up, and even mentioning stashing a bag. At that point, I started mentally taking note of every detail I could. Clothes, bags, facial hair, any defining features. They got off the bus one stop before mine, and I got off right after. But noticed they were still going in the same direction as me, just a bit behind. They were talking loudly about heading to the middle school that I was passing, and were joking and yelling about messing things up in there. They mentioned someone letting them in. Sure enough, once I walked past the school, I saw them veer off onto school property. That's when I called the non-emergency line and reported it. I was able to give a crazy amount of detail, everything I had memorized on the bus. My only regret is that my husband, who studied criminology, told me I could have called 911 instead, because it was an immediate threat to someone's property. I'd never had a reason to before, and I guess I felt hesitant. But looking back, I wish I had done it. Story 39. Back in high school, I had to walk home from a party after my ride left. I took a shortcut through a sketchy part of town near an abandoned golf course. It was quiet, but I was a bit out of it and didn't feel great about the area. Out of nowhere, a guy appeared and asked to borrow my phone. I made up an excuse and started fake calling people while he followed me, rambling and trying to get my attention. Then he asked if I knew what hitting a lick meant. I said no, and he explained it meant knocking someone's gold teeth out to steal the gold. I stupidly called him out, thinking he was bluffing, until he pulled bloody gold teeth out of his pocket. My stomach dropped. I turned and sprinted as fast as I could, eventually hiding in a well-lit Kroger parking lot until I got a hold of a friend to come get me.